Survivor, we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to Surviving the Survivor. It is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime on trending criminal cases, and sometimes these cases are decades old. In this case, about 11 years old, but still working its way through the court system. Of course, we are talking about the murder of FSU law professor Dan Markel, who was gunned down in his Tallahassee driveway back on July 18th, 2014, succumbing to his injuries the next day, about 9 hours later, actually on July 19th. And in that time, Tallahassee PD, they were able to investigate and find those who have now been convicted of these killings. You've got Sigfredo Garcia, the alleged triggerman, Luis Rivera, the Latin Kings gang member who cut a plea deal, Katie Magbanawa, the middle woman, and Wendi Adelson's brother, Dan Markel's ex-brother-in-law, convicted, serving a life sentence in prison. Donna Adelson, she's next up. She is ready to go on trial June 3rd, and it is starting to heat up now a few months out. And the great Joe Potuto said, hey, what are you guys going to do leading up to this? And we're going to be doing more and more stories, and there will be more twists and turns. Without further ado, our best guest tonight. She is the Professor Emerita of the University of Nebraska Law School, Joe Potuto, the professor, followed by another professor here, Melissa Hamilton. She was once a police officer, once a corrections officer, and now a law professor, which is a very unique trio, particularly when it comes to this story. And last but certainly not least, you've got Stephen Webster, Tallahassee criminal defense attorney, and Dan's post-divorce attorney. And another good guy to have, because Webster, at one point, he was not always a lawyer. He did construction. So he's got the mindset of a real blue-collar worker, which I love. He knows and understands people well. And welcome to one and all. Special, huge thank you to the professors, because they had my back. We were driving up to the land of the rodent, Mickey Mouse. America worships a rodent, I've realized. Mickey and Minnie, two rodents. And you can throw in Chuck E. Cheese for extra effect. So I'm here, but during the hearing today, Donna called in via a video conference call. She was not actually in court in Georgia, from what I could tell, was not there. Joe Potuto and Melissa, thank you again for hosting that. And then, of course, I find out that this Thursday, probably at the exact same time when I'm driving back, we are expecting another hearing just related to Wendi Adelson's book. So I have rudely, but yet politely asked Joe and Melissa if they want to hop back in on Thursday. We're going to bring that to you live, assuming there will be a camera there. But Joe Potuto, just now that you've had some time to digest this hearing, it was short, less than 15 minutes. There were a couple of important things, but what stood out to you about the hearing?
I did think about it. And I think overlying everything else, I was struck by the fact that Judge Everett has a slightly different tone to his presiding over the proceedings. He's still very cordial. He's still very personable, but he had for me, listening to him, a slightly harder edge and a slightly seeming less willingness to entertain some of what the defense was asking for. And I think that may be the result of getting tired of this trial and, all the mess that went on last fall. But I just felt it was just a slighter, sharper edge to him. I liked it.
Yeah, I was listening, and he was not messing around. And he was, it's clear that he wants no more conflicts. I think, things are getting tighter because we're getting closer Melissa, did you? And Melissa is coming to us from the UK, by the way. But Melissa, did you get the same sense that as the clock is ticking down toward this trial, that there's a little more tension in the air from the defense, the state, and in particular, Judge Stephen Everett?
I think that was a good assessment from Joe about the judge. But I can imagine why he's frustrated, because this had been going on a long time, and just the change of defense attorneys, and that there are still issues coming up. And the defense mentioned additional motions that they were going to be putting in. And I don't think it helped the defense much when Josh Zellman said something about one of the outstanding motions about whether the prosecution could mention Donna's wealth. Is Josh Zellman also said, it would be a potential retrial if the judge, or the suggestion was if the judge made the wrong decision. And so I can imagine as a judge, when a counsel in front of you is suggesting that throwing out mistrial that's probably pretty irritating for somebody in his position. So yeah, I think the judge as well is continuing to be very professional and such, but then you could see a little bit of irritation, but I still don't think that it filtered through to making him unreasonable.
This is why we have the best guests. You guys explain all this stuff so well. Love the show and the best guests. Who doesn't love the best guests? From Molly Coate. Thank you. And Molly, that's a new name. We're getting a lot of new names lately, which I love. Welcome to one and all. Please hit that like button and subscribe on the way in or on the way out, which is ever is easier. Shout out to the Netherlands and PG, I guess, or JE. Thank you from the Netherlands. So Webster, I got to ask you, and he doesn't mind being called Webster because I know his friends call him Webster, and I consider him a friend now. So the book that Wendy wrote, it was brought up today. It is called This Is Our Story, and it's basically a fictionalized story of a woman feeling stuck in Tallahassee, otherwise known as Hiawassee Springs. Had you, I don't think you knew Dan at this point. She wrote this book, obviously, before the murder took place. But had you ever heard of this book prior to this case? Oh, I think you're muted, Steve.
Sorry. I think Dan may have mentioned it to me at one point, because he definitely took exception to her assertion that he did not read the book. And I do remember this now. And he was actually a little bit offended by that in a couple of regards, because I think it ended up being somehow working its way into the curriculum at FSU School of Law at one point in their the Child Advocacy Center, if I recall correctly. And I know that he helped her promote it at FSU and otherwise, and it really bothered him that she was trying to take the position that he didn't even care enough about her to read the book. So I had heard of it, but
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, Joe Potuto, it's sort of a fascinating aspect to this upcoming trial, because again, it's a fictionalized book that I think she wrote a couple years before the murder, and again, it's about a wife stuck in Tallahassee. So it literally mimics this and their story. And in most of the conversation today, like the thumbnail suggests, it's going to be a discussion about, are the Adelsons going to cannibalize each other? Will they flip on each other? We're going to discuss that. And I've got some clips, some lengthy clips to play, which we'll go through and discuss. But what about, so Thursday's hearing, which I didn't know about until Judge Everett mentioned it, but there is going to be a specific hearing related to the book, This Is Our Story. And the judge is going to have to decide whether or not it is relevant. Joe Potuto, from a law professor's perspective, is this book important? The prosecution is saying that it's autobiographical and illuminating, really, demonstrating motive in this case. They're saying, the defense is saying, this is Wendy's book, not Donna's book, but it has elements of Donna's character in real life in this fictionalized story. So do you think we see this book brought into play in this trial?
Well, the judge already ruled on this, and what happened and what he said was not in terms of what Georgia can ask Wendy on the stand when she puts Wendy on as her witness, but she can use it to impeach Wendy. It is relevant to motive. It would certainly be relevant in a trial if Wendy is prosecuted, but it's a step removed from Donna. I think it would be useful to them if they could get some of this in because it would support and reinforce everything we know about Wendy hating it in Tallahassee and not being happy in the marriage and wanting to get out. But I don't know that it would be such a huge loss if they weren't able to get it in, because there's going to be a lot of evidence that will get in that will show that Wendy was really unhappy in Tallahassee. And that Charlie, who might want to have done, or certainly would have wanted to do a favor for his dear mother, probably wouldn't have done it for Wendy. So there's a connection here. But I'd be interested in what Melissa and Webster, if I can call you that, have to say about it. But I think there's so much else in there about Wendy being miserable and how terrible the divorce was, that if the book doesn't get in, it won't be a big loss for the state.
Melissa, what do you think? Is it vitally important, or will Georgia be fine without the admissibility of this book? I can't remember. Was it brought into Charlie's trial, Joe? Do you remember? It was. Okay.
Yeah.
I have got bad long/short-term memory, but go ahead, Melissa. The importance of this book here.
Well, that could be the Mickey Mouse syndrome on you, the forgetful memory. I think, it's not vital evidence for Donna. I think, though, that the greater value is putting pressure on Wendy. That indicates it's putting a spotlight on her, putting pressure on her. So I think it's part of the building blocks that the prosecution has been creating by going through family member by family member. So I think it's more strategic with respect to Wendy. I agree that if it's not a significant loss in Donna's trial, because there's plenty of other evidence about motive and the discord against Dan Markel.
Webster, I'd like you to weigh in on this too. I mean, you said you recall Dan kind of telling you about it. Again, it's a fictional story. By the way, someone pointed out that it only has 3.7 stars on Amazon, unlike my book, which has 4.7. So I was very happy. A full point higher. I'm very proud of myself. By the way, look at this, Joe. I brought this up. You now have a name. A person is named after you, the Potuto. So Potuto. I love that.
It's tomato. I know.
And Webster, she says Wendy's book is so telling. I mean, how critical, or do you agree with Joe that there's enough smoke there otherwise that they don't really need to be overly concerned about this book, but there's enough of a concern that there's going to be a hearing about it?
Yeah, I agree. I think it could have value as impeachment evidence, but I don't think it's vital. The only thing I will say is I did enjoy listening to Charlie's jail phone calls after he was convicted, when he would say, Wendy's book. He certainly thought it was vital evidence, and I enjoyed watching him lament the fact that she chose to write that book. But I agree with both of their process.
And we do have some we do have some sound coming up about that. Just a quick programming note. Tomorrow we've got the police interview that Lori Vallow did with police ahead of her trial. Thursday, it looks like we're taking this hearing, whether I'm able to make it or not. And then Friday, we are continuing part 3 of real life homicide detectives. In this case, Phil Waters, our regular guest. Scott Duffy can't make it. So I'm bringing in a guy who's got 40 years experience in homicide at the Las Vegas Metropolitan PD. Phil Ramos and Phil, PHIL, and Phil Waters, FIL, are going to break down Wendy's police interview. They've been doing it the last 2 weeks, which you can find. What's up, Lewis? How are you, man? Good to see you. Hey, you should hop on the other stream. We'll get Lewis back on soon enough. That is Louis Baptiste, a former student of Dan Markel's and also Webster's better half, I guess. So Love these shows. Thank you from Patriotic. Appreciate that. Webster, back to you on this one. The defense said in today's hearing that they're planning more motions, up to 7 more motions in the coming weeks, having to do with evidence admissibility. Any guesses as to what the motions could be revolving around?
Man, that's a target-rich environment. I don't. I'm not really sure. They kind of filed the big ones, that with respect to Donna's trip to Vietnam and those kind of things. I don't know really what they could rehash that hasn't already been resolved by the court. That doesn't mean they shouldn't still file it and try to preserve error on appeal. But I really can't imagine right now. I'll think about it a little bit more. Maybe I'll come up with something.
Webster, how old were you when you went to law school?
I was 32.
Huh. Good for you, man. Good for you. Joe Potuto, do you take it easier on the older students, Joe Potuto?
Why would I?
Yeah, that's a Carmela response right there. I
mean, that would be insulting to them if they were treated better, I think. Don't you think, Webster? Wouldn't you be insulted?
I don't know. I can think back on a contract final exam I took that I wouldn't have minded, like a little hometown cooking.
I took contracts once, so I sympathize with you.
Oh, by the way, Vesper's making me even happier. 3.3 stars on Amazon to Joel Waldman's 4.7 stars. But who's comparing? The defense, again, Joe, just to get your take on this, 7 more motions having to do with evidence admissibility. Do you have any thoughts on what these 7 motions could be about? Is there one maybe glaring omission that we are not thinking about that they are going to bring in?
Yeah, and I've had a little more time than Webster to think about this because I heard this earlier today. I'm not sure. There might be something with regard to the technical electronic evidence because they redeposed, didn't they? The expert there, and I think they have their own expert coming in, so maybe they're going to make some sort of challenge there. They also said they have a motion to suppress, which would have to be on a constitutional claim, and I spent some time this afternoon trying to think what they could be moving to suppress that they haven't already tried, and I have no clue. I guess we'll find out. Maybe some of Robert's evidence, or what Robert might say. I mean, they've tried that already. I don't know if they'd have more that they want to try with regard to him.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I heard Josh Zellman, Melissa, who is Donna's new defense attorney, one half of the defense team, Jackie Fulford, the former judge, the other half. He mentioned in the hearing to the judge, he used the word mistrial. What kind of tactic is that? He was talking about, making sure that, I guess, his motions are heard and the depositions. They want an extension on the depositions, that those are given to them so they can depose past April 30th. Is that the kind of thing? I mean, this inside baseball, is this the kind of thing? It's not. It was like a half of a veiled threat. If we don't have the proper time, this could result in a mistrial. How does a judge take that sort of tactic?
I think with this judge, because of his extensive experience, it was not appreciated by the judge. It was a supplemental comment. It was a barb. It was unnecessary. I think it was a bit offensive. The judge knows quite well that if he denies motions from the defense, that's always a possibility that on appeal, that will be a reason that the trial will be overturned. So it was simply unnecessary. I have no idea why he did it, and I don't think the judge took it very well. Now, again, I don't think, based on what I've seen of this particular judge, is that he will take this on board in terms of then retaliating. I just think it's an irritant and, again, unnecessary.
Yeah. Joe Potuto, since you were there, Potuto. What about the depositions? They're asking for an extension beyond April 30th on those. I mean, Who do they still have to depose? And then I want to get back to the private investigators. That's important.
Well, they're redeposing some of the witnesses from Charlie's trial. Trying to think that there's anyone new that they wanted. There were a couple of new names, but I don't recall now. I don't think it's anybody. I mean, it's hard to believe it could be somebody significant that they're deposing now that hasn't been deposed before. I think a lot of this is they have to go over the territory that Daniel Roshbaum went over because they can't use anything that was produced by him since he's disqualified. And I think they want to depose some of the witnesses that weren't deposed by Roshbaum the first time around. But I don't know anybody new except for Sarah, and I always blank on her last name. You always remember, Joel, Wendy's friend from school, Sarah.
Sarah Youssef. Sarah Youssef.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, she's one. Robert and Sarah are the two new witnesses, plus the friend from
Scott Radius.
Yeah, those three, would be three that would be new to this trial, I think.
Dalai Lama, great name, letting us know that the book Wendy wrote was published May 1st of 2013. So it's a year and a month or so before the commission of this crime. Webster, I'm going to come to you, but you weren't, I know you weren't at the hearing today or watching it the way the professors were. But Melissa, to you, the issue with this private investigator, can you kind of explain this, what the argument that Zellman, I guess, was making and what the problem is right now?
What I gather, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it was a private investigator that had been hired by Roshbaum, the previous attorney who had done an investigation. And what this team then wants is to be able to get some of the evidence that private investigator had uncovered. And so the question is, because the Roshbaum is now conflicted out and a lot of what he and his team had done cannot be used because of the conflict, the issue is how much, if any, of the work product of the private investigator can be handed over to the new attorney team.
Yeah, and Melissa froze up there a little bit. Webster, anything to add to that? So this private eye, I mean, this has been handed off. I joked that Donna's becoming Sarah Boone from Orlando, who had, I think, 9 attorneys, but Donna's on 4 and 5. But the important, Judge Everett has, in my opinion, no wiggle room here, right? I mean, he has no wiggle room for any possible kind of conflict. So what happens with this previous private eye? I mean, how important an issue is this?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one more mess that was made by the original sin of staying on the case, and I don't know what the right answer is for the judge. I mean, it's such a sticky wicket that, generally speaking, defendants should have the right to the choice, counsel their choice and choosing, and due process favors that and protects that right. But now that you have this clearly conflicted relationship between Dan and Wendy, how far down the food chain does the fallout flow? I don't know. I mean, I could see certainly areas where Donna could agree to waivers of any conflict on that sort of work product. I would certainly believe that would be the case. But once again, it puts the court in the really awkward position of kind of standing in between the defendant and their defense. And it never should have come to this.
Yeah, the judge ruled on this already. And they came back this afternoon saying, could we just use the so-called raw materials? The investigator took photographs. The investigator did some notes just on, the schedule and, the schematic of who was where. And he sounded pretty reluctant to even let that happen. He said he'd reconsider it. He had interviewed the investigator when the lawyers wanted to use the investigator's work. He at first said no, and then he offered to interview the investigator in camera. And after that, he denied the request to use the investigator. And now they've come back and said, well, what about the photographs he took? What if none of his reports or anything else? And he sounded reluctant to do it today, but he said they could make an argument about it and he'd consider it.
I'm trying to figure out if Webster is trolling all of us or if this is a real review from Wendy's book. I threw up at the table while reading it. Deserves life in prison. Deserves to be put on trial. Let the jurors decide. Show no mercy. Webster, you got to let me know if that's a real. I'll feel better about myself if that's a real comment, but I can't imagine that it is. All right, so the meat and potatoes of today, and again, another wacky week for me because I'm on the road, which hopefully is going to end until I go to Corey Richard's trial, and right after that to Donna's trial at the end, very, very end of April, beginning of May. But the thumbnail's about, this family, the tension that's building. One son, Rob, is already, he's been estranged from the family. And now there's, you can almost cut the tension between Donna, Wendy, and Charlie. So do they flip? And for that, let's watch some of this. Is part of Wendy's police interview about 4 to 5 hours after Dan Markel's murder, when police still had no idea what was going on, and Wendy alleged to have no idea what was going on. Questionable. But we will watch this, and you can see that she pretty much throws her brother right under the proverbial bus. We'll watch. Both of these clips are a few minutes, so we'll go as far as appropriate, then I'll stop, and then we'll continue it on.
And it was a joke he made. He bought the TV for me this morning that got broken, and I was talking to him about whether it made sense to pay to fix it or whether I should get a new one. And it was always his joke that, like, he knew Danny treated me badly, and it was always this joke. He said, I looked into hiring a hitman, and it was cheaper to get you this TV, so instead I got you this TV. He would never. He's my big brother, and he's been taking care of me since I was little, but he would never. And I said.
Now, Webster, I'm going to stop it there. I learned something interesting. We've got these homicide. I learned so much on this show from the guests, but as she's saying he would never, she's nodding her head yes. And these are like subconscious human movements. I'll bring it back here a touch.
Instead, I got you this TV.
You'll see.
He would never.
Look, she's nodding her head yes.
He's my big brother, and he's been taking care of me.
But Webster, she's in here. This is in the first, hour or so of the interview, and it goes on for, I think, a bunch of hours. But she is literally volunteering this information that he made this joke about this hitman. And Charlie references this later on, which we're going to play also. Is this the sort of thing that now that Charlie Adelson is sitting in a dark, cold prison in South Dakota that he is stewing on and wondering, hey, what can I do to get myself out of here? And I don't give a crap what happens to my sister now. Is that a plausible scenario?
It happens all the time in the criminal justice system. So, I've seen best friends, brothers, sisters flip on each other, and it's like one of 3 possibilities for me. One, they had already talked about as a group the fact that they had made this hitman comment in front of mixed company, and they were wondering if there was a way to get in front of it. And of course, to say we would never have brought that up in the interview if we really had anything to do with it, we never would have done that. That's kind of one for me. 2 is that Wendy just threw this out there because she was panicked. Maybe she panicked a little bit and she found herself talking about something, and before she knew it, it was kind of out of her mouth. I don't believe that one. I think she's more calculating than any of them at this point. And she's been playing them all along. I think they thought they were like protecting her and kind of moving her around on the chessboard. And I think they should realize at some point that she had them on the chessboard. But I think what's more likely for me is that Wendy was worried it was going to come back, that it was going to come back to Charlie and had his fingerprints on it. And so she threw this out there to protect herself. So she could say, well, geez, I never would have said that if I was part of the conspiracy, but it was true because he made that joke. And then she can corroborate it with people like Jeff Cass and others. So I know that Charlie's stewing on it. He was stewing on it immediately after the trial, and as well he should be, because I think his sister, in preservation mode for herself, like you said, threw him right under the bus.
Yeah. I definitely want to get STS Nation involved here about who could flip on who. So if you've got questions for the three guests, put them in the triple Qs. Meanwhile, thank you to Annalie for the super sticker here. And also Josephine Santamoro. She is an ER nurse. Finished watching The Pit. I love that show. Probably one of the best shows I've seen in recent years. It's all about the ER. And Josephine had a few strokes a couple of weeks back, and she's recovering and now needs the help that she was once giving. So prayers for Josephine, and hope she's feeling better. And that's a funny comment too. Amazing Donna's narrow wax canals were able to hear everything today. And Webster's got the best line. He calls them the Erie canals, EERIE canals, because Donna's a little eerie, I guess. So Charlie flips. Could he get out eventually? So Melissa, back to you on this. I mean, considering he's serving life in prison, what sort of legal incentive is there left for him to cooperate with prosecutors? Is there anything he could do, including flipping on Wendy, to maybe give him a chance of seeing daylight again at some point?
I think it's unlikely because there's not a lot of incentive for prosecutors once somebody has been convicted and sentenced to give them another deal, because then everybody else would want to take their chance at trial, and then with the potential backup that if they are convicted and sentenced, then they will cooperate and they'll get a reduction, and you don't want to incentivize that. But I also want to mention the idea of, so a lot of times in this case, we've been talking about whether they're going to flip on one of the others, but there's also a possibility that any of them flips on themselves, meaning that they change their strategy, even if it seems to be against their own best interests. And what I mean by that is that it's also possible that Charlie would finally say, yes, I did it. And that might seem implausible, but that can happen because, again, things are, the truth can be stranger than the fiction. For example, I'm remembering a case here in England last year where it was a prosecution for a young girl was murdered, they believe, by her family. And so they were prosecuting the father and the stepmother. And the father throughout the trial was pointing fingers at the stepmother, saying and he testified, saying it was all her, it wasn't me. And right in the middle of the trial, he flipped himself and said, no, that was untrue. I did it. We have no idea why he had decided to change that. And that was just an example I'm using, that we sometimes really have no idea what people do. Sometimes they flip to benefit themselves, and sometimes what they do it against their own best interests. So we never know, which is what makes this case so fascinating, is there's twists and turns all the time.
Yeah, and I feel like they're not ending anytime soon. I think we're going to get a couple more before this trial kicks off on June 3rd. Joe Potuto, and then we'll continue to play this out. From Beachside Boomer, I don't see, which is a new name, welcome. I don't see Charlie flipping until his appeals are done. He would be admitting his guilt by doing that. How reasonable a legal point is that? And on the flip side, is it too late once his appeals are done?
Well, I would agree with Beachside. You changed the Boomer, I think it was.
Yeah.
I don't think if he thinks he has a reasonable chance at a new trial, that this is the time that he would flip, because he'd have to admit guilt unless the state was willing to offer him some sort of pretty good deal that on a balance he would think was better than, rolling the dice and hoping that he'd get a new trial and that he'd be acquitted in the new trial. But I do think, I mean, if I knew my sister was running around looking like she's having the time of her life, leading a great life, being in Austin, Texas, and here I am sitting in prison, miserable, being afraid I might be killed by the gang, I wouldn't like it at all. And Meredith gave a couple of reasons why somebody might admit guilt. I would say I might do it to say if I'm going down, I want her to be right here with me. That would give me some sense of being a terrible person I am, but it would give me some sense of satisfaction, that I wasn't going down all by myself.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And La Mesa, who comes to us from Toronto, isn't Donna Sue, Webster, I'm going to throw this to you, isn't Donna Sue most likely to not flip per se, but talk? She's always been unable to calm her own nerves and shut her damn trap. I think she'll be the undoing. She can't stop. It's raised an interesting point that I was just thinking about. Webster, what are the legal ramifications? Let's say Donna's on the stand and she somehow accidentally implicates Wendy. Let's say she just offers something up that she shouldn't have, and it points to Wendy's guilt. This is a hypothetical. From a legal perspective, what would then happen?
Well, given that Wendy's a co-conspirator, has been listed as a co-conspirator in this matter, you may be able to make the argument that any such admission would have been a statement that was made in furtherance of kind of covering up the co-conspiracy at least. But I think at the end of the day, Wendy's attorneys would have to have the ability to cross-examine Donna on that. I mean, it creates a confrontation issue. If, let's say, they charged Wendy, tried to introduce that statement, Wendy's position would be, well, I didn't have lawyers sitting at the table to cross-examine my mother when she offered that testimony. And given that I didn't have attorneys who were expressly looking out for my interests and trying to cross-examine her on that, it can't be admissible against me. But they could try to put Donna on, and then if she said something different, they could impeach her with it. But of course, we'd probably be in the same problem we're having now, where Donna would be on appeal and she would be refusing to answer any questions. I hope that makes sense what I just said, but that's kind of the best way I can analyze that right now.
Yeah.
Webster, do you think that would put pressure on Georgia to prosecute Wendy if you got that sort of admission that she was implicated by her mother on the stand? Even if you couldn't use it in the trial against Wednesday, now it's out in the public that her mother has provided evidence that, yes, she was involved. Seems to me it will be a little harder for the state then to sit and not bring the prosecution.
I would certainly hope so. I don't think anybody would sit here and realistically think that Donna would intentionally implicate herself or others, because Donna thinks she's going home. I mean, that's why she's pushing her attorneys for what still is a relatively quick, streamlined trial for these new attorneys to try to come up to speed and prepare the defense, because she thinks she's going to walk. I mean, I do believe these people are that delusional, and nobody beats the Adelsons. So yeah, I would certainly hope so, Professor. I mean, I don't know how the state could ignore that if it happened.
Yeah. No hate here. This is an interesting comment, Joe Potuto. Prosecution said in an earlier trial that Wendy found out about Charlie's involvement at the dinner where she vomited. So prosecution can't have it both ways, that she knew about it earlier. Can the arguments change?
Yeah, I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at that direct of Wendy on the stand. I don't remember Georgia saying explicitly that it happened at the dinner. She may have said something that might lead one to believe it, but I certainly don't remember her being that clear about it. And she's been very guarded on the question she asked Wendy because of the immunity. She doesn't want to give Wendy more room to say things that then can't be used against her, in a prosecution. So I just don't remember it being said.
I mean, I remember it being said. I just don't remember the specifics of it. So maybe we can do that. Bring that back up on a future show. But let me continue to play this out. And then we've got a jailhouse call that's pretty damning for Wendy from Don and Charlie's perspective. But this again is Wendy, just a few hours after Dan Markel's murder back on July 18th, 2014, where she is throwing her brother under the bus.
Since I was little, but he would never. And I told that to the repair guy this morning.
Right. That's okay.
I said, he asked me how much it cost, and I said I didn't know because it was a gift, because my brother said it was cheaper than a hitman. It was my divorce present.
Okay.
Such a horrible thing to say. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
But even my family, who felt like I had been mistreated, would never do something like this. Never.
Well, you guys have been divorced for over a year. Has there been any type of abuse in that time?
Of him towards me?
Yeah.
No. It's, he's litigious, and we have an ongoing case because the house, it shouldn't be in my name anymore, but when we settled the case of our divorce, he said, one of the agreements the court said was, Danny wanted to stay in the house. They said, you can have the house, but you need to pay her half of the amount of what the house is worth. And he agreed to it, and then months passed and he just never paid me. And so we have ongoing litigation. Danny treated me badly, and it was always this joke. He said, I said was, Danny wanted to.
That was my screw up. But Webster, what I find interesting here is she is offering up all this information about, without really being asked about it, about the financial situation, which you were helping Dan with, I think, after the divorce and through the divorce. I don't know that there's anything specific in what she just said, but financial motive is definitely a possibility. And I'm just wondering, again, just going back primarily here to Charlie, if he regrets getting involved and being convicted in this, sort of doing Wendy's dirty work on behalf of his mother, circling us back to that question. Like, does he speak up? Does he speak out? Does he say, if this is the case, and maybe it's not, that Wendy was really the one that was the catalyst for this? But this is an interesting exchange because she is very generous with her information about potential financial motive.
I think, echoing what one of your viewers said earlier, it's hard to envision Charlie flipping while his case is still on appeal. But I had I've had lots of crazy conspiracy theories on this case, but one of my most outlandish conspiracy theories in this case was when Upperman first came in working on Charlie's appeal, and Upperman's a super smart lawyer, and there was all of the contretemps about the conflict with Dan. I started thinking to myself, what if Charlie and Upperman, realizing that the only way they can cut a deal at this point, I do believe it would require the court's imprimatur and approval, which isn't a guarantee, right? Charlie comes clean and then testifies and everything else, because the state's not going to agree to go live with a new sentence unless and until he's actually cooperated through the trial. And so what they did is this: they got together and said, look, this Rashbaum thing is an ironclad conflict of interest, and it's a solid appellate issue. Come in, give us an affidavit. We'll do it with the agreement that we will not use it against you at trial unless and until you were called as a witness in Wendy's case and you don't tell the truth. Give us an affidavit about what really happened. We will waive basically our appellate rights. So you don't have to worry about the judge approving any deal we cut after the fact. The first DCA will go there and say, we don't contest it. The state agrees that this is a conflict that irreparably harmed this trial, and it needs to be remanded back for further proceedings. Then they kick it back. Yeah, you see where I'm going? This is how crazy this case makes me. So 11 years later, this is the way my brain spins. But anyway, but I, going back, I agree with your viewer that said, it's hard to envision a scenario where he flips while his case is on appeal unless there's some sort of deal in place. for him, his mother, and whoever else that he may care about. And that's probably a very small universe of people.
Yeah. By the way, this is very clever. This would make a great shirt from some rando out there. Wendy, When, Wendy, like implying when could there be an indictment? Very clever. STS Nation, I would say best guess, better community, smart community. Quick question to Joe, and then, let me play this out, and then I'll come to Joe on the flip side with a question. Here we go.
In the house, they said you can have the house, but you need to pay her half of the amount of what the house is worth. And he agreed to it, and then months passed, and he just never paid me. And so we have ongoing litigation where I filed a motion in the court to have him pay me what he said he would, and he filed a counter motion for sanctions against my attorney because he thought that she did something wrong, which she didn't. But so, I mean, she withdrew from the case and was going to serve as a witness. I mean, she's not going to lash out at him for it. She's using the legal process to do it. My parents are, very angry towards him. But even when they're around my kids, they would never say a bad word about my kid's father. They're really, really careful about that. They just like him, but they know he's the father of my kids. They would never do that.
Right.
I don't know who would be angry enough. My parents are, very angry towards him. But even when they're around my kids, they would never say a bad word about my kid's father. They're really, really careful about that. They just like him, but they know he's the father of my kids. They would never do that.
Right.
I don't know who would be angry enough with him.
Well, that's what I have to find out.
To do something like this.
So that's that. It's interesting because now I'm watching it the way Phil Waters watches it after he investigated 400 homicides. And again, when she's talking about her own parents never saying a bad word in front of the kids, her body language is saying something totally different. Joe Potuto, right there in that exchange, she talks about Harvey and Donna both being furious at Dan Markel. This is not by any means a smoking gun, but the little pieces start to add up. Curious, watching it with homicide detectives. Now, what does a law professor see watching that clip? And
I think it's a long discussion on something that's not relevant to her husband's death. I mean, she went off on a tangent with the divorce, with details about it. I mean, your husband, with your former husband, they've told you it's not going to survive, and you're sitting there being interviewed, and it just seems to me she's in the wrong place talking about it, and she cries at the wrong time. I don't know why she's crying about the divorce and not about his death. But I never found that interview persuasive at all. It didn't ring true to me, and every time I hear it, it continues not to ring true to me.
Yeah, and again, this Friday, part 3, you're getting 2 veteran homicides. Literally, I think between them have maybe 700-800 homicides that they've worked, and they're going to be breaking down the interview. And Phil has had some really fascinating, comments. About that. Yeah.
I wish in that interview that the detective had not told her that Dan was not going to survive, and let her worry about it a little. I don't know why he did that, and it just seemed to be that way. I'm not an experienced police interviewer. I haven't done 40 years of interviews, but it just seemed to me not a good tactic to let her know that she didn't have to worry about Dan waking up and maybe being able to identify the shooter or implicate her in some way or contradict some of her story about her alibi.
Yeah, when she finds out that he's not dead, it's a very strange reaction. Like, oh man, almost like the job hasn't been finished. And I think like if you play this in front of a jury, if she was to be indicted, it can be interpreted by a jury in many interesting ways. But Melissa Hamilton, to you, if Wendy were to be indicted, and that's a big if she were to be indicted, what about the issue of her being, the mother of Dan's children? Does that give her any kind of legal pull, any kind of playing cards? The fact that the father, Dan, sadly, is no longer with us, and now she's the mother, and she's the only one that she can make the argument that can really, with her parents being old and the Markels aging, that she's the only one who can really take care of these kids. Where does the law come in with an argument like that?
So they would have no relevance to the adjudication of whether she's guilty or not. The attorneys, though, if found guilty, would try to argue it as sentencing, as some kind of mercy or something. But the kids are getting older, and so not as relevant to the caretaking role. There are other people in the family that would be capable of taking over. So would at sentencing, would that be an argument for defense? Sure. Is it very winnable in this case? Probably not, just because there is the availability of other really good caretakers.
Thank you. This next clip is a bit longer. This is now the jailhouse call. This is very interesting because it's right after Charlie's convicted, November 6, 2023, and in the week prior, because Donna is literally arrested 1 week later, she and Charlie talk every day. I think it was like an average of close to 5 hours a day that they were talking. And shout out to Canine Catherine in Maui, friend of mine, friend of the show, and we'll listen to this and break this down. So here we go.
They made it out like, they painted such a fucking picture. There was not a chance in hell I was going to get a fair shake. That's your bottom line.
I want to tell you, we were where you were over that weekend. We were all where you were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody thought anything different other than pretty obvious. I mean, he put on an amazing case. Charlie testified perfectly. It's done. He got it.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop it right there. First of all, a huge shout out to G Money, Gigi McKelvey, her podcast, Pretty Lies and Alibis. This is she gave us this, so we didn't have to go through and put in all the captions and stuff. But she has an excellent podcast. Webster, this just kind of shows the hubris of this family, the arrogance that she says Rashbaum did an amazing job, which, to be fair, a lot of people did not think that, and he was convicted. And it's almost like Donna is in absolute disbelief, and Charlie comes right out of the gates here, dropping the F-bomb, saying he had no chance. He's really putting the onus, at least here, partly on, Tallahassee and the prosecution being, unfair, again, unfairly, I think, trying to out this poor victimized family. When you watch the first couple of minutes like we just did, what is running through your head?
Yeah, like you said, hubris, but it's really delicious how he says, they painted this picture. Yeah, with evidence. They painted the picture with evidence. And he's like, and then I knew I wasn't going to get a fair chance. Well, yeah, dang it. If only that pesky evidence hadn't been introduced by the state against you, like you would have had a great chance, Charlie. I just want to go back a little bit to Wendy's interview because, from where I'm at, there's no doubt in my mind that this family got together and they roundtabled how she was going to act in the interview. They knew she was going to be interviewed. That's just common sense. So the question becomes, does she talk? Does she say she wants a lawyer? My mind's eye, I see them all agreeing, no, we need to just have you march in there. You need to put on the performance of your life. We know you can be a great actress, darling, when the lights go on. And so then that's when I start to wonder, okay, well, how much of this did Wendy freelance on and how much of it was planned? And I could see them talking about the dirty details of that divorce because it was dirty. It was beyond the pale. as an attempt to try to steal the thunder away from somebody else, bringing it out later. And once again, to say, well, I wasn't, I was having a stream of consciousness conversation with the detective. I wasn't withholding anything. I wouldn't have brought that up if I was involved in any conspiracy. And so I could see where that was actually pre-planned. But I will say this, like Wendy's crying, and I know these investigators who worked on this case. I've worked with them for years. I've known them for decades. They fell for it. They fell for her blubbering. They believed her when she was in there blubbering and crying. All the histrionics and all those tears. It's like what the professor said, like she was clearly fishing to get confirmation that he was dead. She was fishing for it. Okay. Yeah. And when she heard that he may not be dead, she didn't have the response that, any other person would have had. Well, thank goodness, is there a chance? She was like, should I take the children up there to see him? I mean, she was trying to get confirmation that he was dead. And once she got it, in my mind, there was a clear serenity that washed over her, that he was not going to survive this. So that's kind of my take on that. I'm sorry I went off topic a little bit.
No. It's interesting you bring that up because our homicide detectives and FBI agents said the exact same thing. They've been pretty critical of Craig Isom here. I'm sure he's a fine investigator, but they feel like she basically got him under her spell, under the quote unquote Wendy spell, which I don't fully understand. But
she beguiled him. I think that that's what she does. She goes through life trying to beguile people.
Yeah. I don't think it would have worked on Phil Waters. What he had to say, and again, these are, if you go to the live video tabs, we've been doing this the last couple of weeks. Very interesting analysis. But I'm going to keep going here because this is a little bit longer. This, again, is the jailhouse call between Charlie Adelson and Mama Donna. Here we go.
Everybody said the same thing.
We were very happy.
Like, what these people, like, it almost should be like a do-over if you have such a bad verdict but it's a verdict produced by a prosecutor that brought it to be able to bring down the shit that has nothing to do with me. But it's enough to make you hate my sister. It's enough to make you hate my mother. It's enough to make you hate me. And it's one thing if they just hate you. It's another thing if they hate your whole family and they feel like you're shitting on them in Tallahassee. Miami people coming up here and really, really like belittling us, comic book. There's only one reason why Catherine read that line from her book. There's only one reason, and it's to drive home the message that Wendy thinks she's smarter than everybody else. She foreshadowed her move in a book. She even wrote a book about it.
Gonna hold it right there. I mean, Joe Potuto, this is heavy right here. I mean, the book and the drive-by, for those who do not know, she drives by, Wendi Adelson does, the crime scene right afterwards. And Charlie seems not happy. He's saying that Georgia read that for one reason from the book. I don't know. Is this enough to make you think that Charlie's angry enough at Wendy right now? I mean, he seems to be more or equally angry with the prosecution here, but he's certainly not happy with Wendy.
No, and he's now had a year to sit in prison and think about it. He's not going to feel less happy given his circumstances. And this isn't. He's got that conversation where he talks about her driving up to the house, and he makes a great closing argument for the state. I listened to that yesterday, and I thought, my God, Georgia could take what he said word for word and just use it in a closing. It was brilliant for a closing argument about how impossible that story was. Yeah, he's angry. And, if I kill somebody for somebody else, and then she went around messing up the case and doing everything look like that she could to implicate me, I'd be pretty angry too.
Yeah, this is a fantastic point. Very simple, but very poignant. From Sunny 1433. Melissa, I'm going to ask you about this. Funny that with the phone calls, Charlie never says to Donna, it was Katie all along extorting me. I believed her story. I mean, that is the defense. And if it did happen, it happened to me, the first thing I would say to my mother is, how did Katie get away with this? Her name's never even invoked here. That's very interesting psychologically to me. Do you think this is a strong point?
I do. So a lot of what he relied upon in his defense, they didn't discuss in any of these calls. So it's kind of interesting that the selection of what they talked about and not versus what then his defense was. For example, the double extortion. I don't believe in the jailhouse calls they talked about. It suddenly came up. But one of the things I noted though is, so I wrote it down, is I wasn't aware of the motion for a do-over because you're unhappy with the verdict. But the other thing is, in terms of Donna's reflection on thinking that it all went perfect in Charlie's trial, that it was a great defense and Charlie did perfect in testifying, is that seems to be exemplary of confirmation bias, which she was only picking up the clues that confirmed her belief that this was a good defense, that they were paying good money and it would work. And so it's very easily explainable why she could delude herself. She only picked up any signs that were positive to the case and entirely ignored everything else.
Yeah, this call to me is just pretty amazing. We're going to continue to play this. A couple more questions, final thoughts. We'll wrap it up and tell you what's up for the rest of the week. But here we go.
She knew this movie was going to happen. She even wrote a book about it. What was the name of that town, Wendy? That you refer to as a small stop in their plan on the way to civilization.
I mean, Joe, I got to stop it again. I mean, he says right there, she knew, Charlie's saying that this was going to happen. I mean, it sounds pretty incriminating to me right there.
Yeah, I think assuming that this could get in, and it seems to me that I agree with Webster that the confrontation clause is going to get away with it and get in the way unless Charlie takes the stand. But I think the argument that they can make is that he's not saying that as affirmative statements. He's making the argument that this is the way it's sounding, that Georgia made it sound this way to the jury. And I think actually credibly, I think they could make that argument because I think from what he said, you could take it two different ways, and I think they'd have that opportunity.
That's a great point. Don't know if I buy it, but it's a great point. And right. I guess a good attorney would do that, which is why I'm not an attorney. But let's keep playing this out.
I mean, it is kind of crazy that she wrote a book and put that in there, don't you think?
What?
I mean, it is kind of creepy that she wrote a book and put that line in there with that town. Like, she could have left that line out of the book. But she didn't know, like, she was just writing a book.
Of course.
Like, she could have called the town Biloxi. She could have fucking left the line out about it being on a small stop, along the way, on the way to civilization. Like, it sounds like she's foreshadowing a future event in her book, doesn't it?
Webster, it's tough it's weird because it's almost like dumb luck. You know, he's putting it sort of in the context of the appearance of this book. But the other way to read it, of course, is that this was a plan, created and set out by Wendy herself, who's not indicted, obviously. How do you read this? How do you interpret this call? What's happening here right now?
It was my take, and I want to thank Pretty Lies and Alibis as well, because I listened to these for hours on end. My poor children, every time we were in the car together, were begging for mercy. But I interpreted this, it was almost like it was a veiled threat by Charlie. It was a shot across Wendy's bow. He was saying, look, you think that you've gotten away with this. Don't be so confident and cocky. Because at this point, she's completely excommunicated her mother and Charlie. And now he's sitting in solitary with feces smeared all over the walls. So that was kind of the way I took a lot of this conversation. He knew that it was going to get back to Wendy one way or the other. and he wanted to send a chill up her spine. You know, basically like, you know, you may think that you're in the clear, but you're not.
Yeah. I'm just looking at this comment. Charlie does have a young son, Roman, and all those kids, no matter what you think of the adults, they're all victims. Katie Magbanua and Sigfredo. It's awful. And I think Luis Rivera has kids too. All because a family didn't want their grandkids / kids growing up in what's a very cool city, Tallahassee. I could make a lot of arguments for why Tallahassee, and I live in Miami, why Tallahassee is cooler than Miami, but I won't get into that now. But we'll keep playing this out from this point.
Well, she made it sound like that. I know.
I mean, how many kids does this lady have in the book? 2 boys? What does this lady's husband do? He's an English professor, so he's a school professor. What school does he teach at? What school does he teach at in the book?
I don't know. Do you know?
What's that?
I don't know.
Like,
What school he taught at? I have no idea.
What was that?
In Wendy's book, I read it ages ago.
So many years ago.
I think it's North Florida State University.
Yeah. She made it up. I don't know.
So the husband's a professor at one school? He's at Florida State University. And how many boys does she have? 2 boys. And what's the name of that town? Sounds just like that. What we say is that it's just a small stop on the way to civilization. Like that sounds, I mean, I'm just telling you, if someone read that line in a book and the author was Wendi Adelson, it sounds like she is foreshadowing her big move to Miami. Right before she buys a bottle of Old Bourbon. Like, and then she's driving by, and then did you like when Kaplan goes, she couldn't help herself. She had to drive.
Joe, at this point, it seems like Charlie's getting like kind of worked up. Like, you know, it's like he's talking about it, but he's also thinking about it while speaking about it, and it's kind of incredulous. And what else is interesting to me is that, I mean, Charlie's not an idiot. I mean, he might be for what he did, but he's obviously a fairly intelligent guy. And he's talking so openly about this on a recorded call that he's got to know is recorded. And this is potentially very damning to Wendy. So the question is he purposely doing this right now in an attempt to start to throw her under the bus?
Yeah. I don't know. I know I listened to Webster say that, and I think it's certainly persuasive to say that. I also think he is really right now angry. This is right after he's been convicted, and he's looking at the rest of his life in prison, and he's lashing out at everything. He's certainly not reflective about how he got himself in this situation. He's just, you know, talking about everybody else. And I think you can get yourself into a situation where you start, you know, building up all the anger and forget who you're talking to or who might be listening, or the fact that you're on tape, because you're just so worked up that, you know, nothing else matters except getting all that anger out. So I don't know. It could be either.
Melissa, there are a gazillion what ifs or what abouts. This one's kind of interesting. Not probably very realistic, but Mama Snippy here. Would Donna have a chance if she said it was actually Wendy who extorted her and Charlie? Talking about flipping. Their love for the boys kept them from being completely honest. Wow, that would be a real twist of an ending right there. I don't think it's realistic, but what do you make of this comment? It just goes to show that there's potential avenues, I think, for some of the Adelsons to come out and basically destroy the other Adelsons.
I think that's very creative theory there. But we can't discount anything because, again, we get left turns quite a bit in this case. Just the fact of the double extortion was a surprise at Charlie's trial. So who knows what she'll come up with. They seem to feel that they can explain away anything and change what they've said and explain have a storyline through it, and they believe that everybody is going to be gullible. And that actually, one reflection is that it's not unreasonable for them to think that people will be gullible, because even as we saw in the tape of Wendy talking to a very experienced detective, who, as you all have indicated, is the detective probably was a little bit bamboozled by Wendy's histrionics, is that could be true for Donna as well in her trial. So everybody on this call is quite familiar with the case. I think most people no longer believe in Donna, but we're different. We've been experiencing this case. We've been seeing it over and over again. That jury is going to be new to Donna. They're going to look at her and they're going to see this older woman who's white and from a privileged background. They're not going to have all of the experience and the history, and they may well believe her when she gets on the stand. I'm just thinking, for example, of my grandmother, who's no longer with us, but my grandmother had gender biases. I think my grandmother, and the reason I mention that is it's Tallahassee, so you're very likely to get an older jury, is my grandmother and probably grandfather too would look at Donna and not think, I believe, that she could have done any of this just because of their bias. So I think it is real in terms of whether she's going to be able to convince them that she's entirely innocent.
Shout out to AA Legal Focus in the chat. She's been following the story a very long time on her channel. You got Ruthless in the UK doing the right thing, hitting the like button on the way in. We're going to wrap up this jailhouse call from Charlie to Donna right after his conviction. A couple more minutes of this, and then we'll get some final thoughts.
How the client to make sure it was done.
Yeah.
Like, now, if you want to look at where she's ever been to, Tallahassee, and bought something, so she went home with it, she was good. But you know what it looks like?
Oh,
It looks like, well, let me just tell you something. That right there is 1 in a million. That she goes on that date at that time by the street on the house, and then they say that she wanted to make sure the job was done.
right.
I mean, those things like that. Listen, you can't dispute that she didn't take that route. She took the route.
She did.
But she was there, and she did a 3-4 turn.
That's right.
So when you're sitting and you're evaluating the case,
It wasn't where they said.
right? But I'm just saying, like, I guess you could see police paper. Who knows? But I'm just saying, one says 2 or 3, one says 4 or 5. But the point is, the fact that she put her fucking car there on that time at that date on the way out of her way is enough for people to go, whoa. She must have known something was going on. There's no way she shows up there on that date, on that time, without having prior knowledge. She's involved.
I mean, Webster, now he's talking about the drive-by, and he's literally saying exactly what the jury basically bought in terms of Charlie's story. This is getting harder and harder to kind of go with what Joe was saying, which is this is the perception that it was creating. It sounds like it is the reality of what happened, Stephen Webster.
Yeah, and I don't find myself saying this often. If ever, I agree with Charlie 100% on this. It is 1 in a million that she would have just so happened. And if you live in Tallahassee and you're familiar with the area, it's 1 in 2 million. She went past a lot of other easily accessible liquor stores to go to, at the time, what wasn't one of the nice liquor stores in town. They have since redone that, and it's a nice store now. But at the time, I mean, it wasn't the greatest store in town. So she went out of her way to get to that store. And then she went out of her way in taking the route that she took to get to that store. And, you know, and I think it's just fair to say that if your ex-husband has caused you so much grief, as she, you know, put on all the tears for when she discussed him, it seems to me like you would want to avoid his home. You know, you would want to avoid going past his house in the off chance that you may see him, you know, or whatever. Just bring back all of the pain and suffering that he allegedly caused you to endure. So Charlie nailed it right on the head here. This guy, like, he had a moment of clarity here, and I absolutely believe this was intentional. It was him basically saying, hello, state attorney, hello, world. Like, you have to charge her now, without him coming out and expressly saying it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched this in a while, and it's pretty fascinating. And it's just so detailed, and you can feel his anger building as we go. I'll keep playing it here. We're almost through it here.
The same nonsense about bullet bourbon.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the bullet bourbon got squashed because they had the email.
Yeah. They
that was,
had the invitation. Yeah.
Yeah, they had the invitation that was sent for two people getting married for a stop the bar party to show that to request a bottle of liquor.
A specific one.
Yeah, which is crazy. Like,
It is crazy.
that's
It's crazy.
which is crazy. I mean, it's crazy. She's going to buy a bottle of bullet bourbon to celebrate that night. Like, if she didn't have that email, there's no explaining it. She doesn't drink alcohol. There's 5,000 bottles in the store. She passes by the crime scene, and she goes and buys a bottle of bullet bourbon to celebrate that night.
That is a very interesting call in retrospect. Melissa Hamilton, the last part obviously is, she's going to a stock the bar party and goes out of her way to buy that bullet bourbon. And he's saying basically she doesn't drink. It was a celebratory bottle. He's kind of becoming just incredulous at this point. Almost saying, like, how could Wendy screw up this badly by doing all these things to get me convicted? It's basically what he's saying here.
Yeah, so he's very angry with his sister on a number of points that he made in this call. A couple of reactions. One is for Webster, you are right that you have a lot of conspiracy theories. I've enjoyed them this time. But anyway, so one of the things that people are often curious about is how could these very intelligent people, knowing that these calls were being recorded, still talk about this stuff? And it's just that's probably the reality of modern times, is that we forget we're being recorded. And or another component too is that phone between Charlie and his mother was a lifeline to him for some normality. And so whatever risk that was of it actually being recorded and being listened to for him but he still needs to talk to his mother. Because remember, a lot of the testimony was he talked to his mother frequently. And so for him, just in terms of his life, it probably was worth the risk, whether it was conscious or not, to be able to talk to his mother as he's used to and to vent, and then just forgetting that it's being recorded, or maybe not necessarily forgetting, but banking on the fact that maybe they won't be listening to it, because not obviously only a small subset of calls are actually listened to from jails and prisons. So just a reflection on human nature in terms of the calls, and then they're being willing to reveal quite interesting things in those calls that we can now actually listen to.
Yeah. It's the hindsight you have is interesting. For those who do not know, this is Stephen Webster, goes by Webster, all around great guy. He does defense work in Tallahassee, and he was Dan Markel's post-divorce attorney, and his partner Louis Baptiste was Dan Markel's student at FSU Law, and a very bright student. Great question here, or maybe a comment from Dr. Reinhardt, who's in the chat a lot. Of all the Adelsons, which one most likely first thought of murdering Dan Markel as an option? I'm thinking the others will turn on that one. And only that's an answer only the Adelsons know. Do you agree with that, Stephen Webster? And your final thoughts here about the possibility of a flip, and by whom?
That's a fascinating question, and I could honestly give 3 different answers to that question. So my conspiracy theory, allow me to see the evil in all of these people. I will say though, like, practicing law and especially the kind of law that I practice in this case is a prime example. I knew that the Adelsons did it the second I learned that he was murdered. And I absolutely prefer a conspiracy over a coincidence at this point, and especially when you're dealing in this sort of world with these sort of animosities. But I would just like to say that, Louis Baptiste stuck his head in here. Thanks to Dan, I've known him now almost 11 years. Dan connected us right before he was murdered, and I will forever be grateful for that. Louis is more than a law partner. I mean, he is a family member, and he is like an uncle to my children. So thank you, Dan. To the Markels, I just want to say, the only maybe bright spot in this for me was getting the opportunity to know each of you. Ruth and Phil, your strength and your grace and your dignity never ceases to amaze me. Shelley, God bless you. I know that sometimes the siblings can kind of be overlooked, but I hope you know that you're never going to be overlooked. And for the children, in the off chance that one day Dan's children watch this, I will tell you that if you ever want to know the truth about the way your father loved you, thought about you, and adored you, please call me. Because I have so much to tell you that nobody else, I don't trust anybody else in your universe will tell you. But I promise you, I watched it and lived it in the brief time that I knew Dan. And those of us who knew him, we knew that you were the most precious part of his life. And I'm sorry that you didn't have the opportunity to really know that and appreciate that.
As always, incredibly eloquent is Stephen Webster, and I bet you're going to get that call one day. And I know you're going to have a lot to say. Huge thanks again to Melissa Hamilton and Joe Potuto. For those who do not know, Melissa started her career as a police officer, a corrections officer, became a lawyer and a law professor in the UK at Surrey, at the University of Surrey in the UK. Melissa, does anyone flip here, and who flips on whom? Your final thoughts.
Okay, I'm going to take Webster's conspiracy theories and say maybe it's Dan Rashbaum who flips and then moves to Vietnam.
That's a great answer. I think if Rashbaum's listening, he's definitely chuckling right now. Dan came on the show. Don't know how he's doing or what he's doing, but he's out of this bit of a mess now. Hashtag here, arrest Wendy. That's what a lot of people are wanting and thinking. Joe Potuto is a great human being. She actually was a member of STS Nation and is now one of our biggest, best guests. She is the professor emerita, University of Nebraska Law School. She's taught all over the place. Does this happen, Joe? I know you'll skirt around a actual answer because you don't know and we don't know, but got to ask you, does Wendy eventually get arrested, and who flips on who in your scenario and your final thoughts?
I've answered that before. I do think she will be arrested and prosecuted because I don't see that after this trial, with the possible exception of Charlie's appeals running and he has nothing else to do and no other recourse, there won't be any other evidence. So it's a kind of, you either do it or you decide you don't have enough and don't. And I think, a prosecutor should not be prosecuting a case unless she has a sincere belief that there's sufficient evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think there is that evidence here. I think you've got to draw some inferences in the right direction, but I think there is that evidence. And I think, I actually think it's the job of a responsible prosecutor to try cases when there's not going to be anything more, particularly murder cases, than just let it go because you don't have, a really high conviction that there will be a prosecution. So I do think she's going to be prosecuted. Who's flipping on whom? I still think, I can only say that were I Charlie, I'd be flipping at some point on Wendy. Not on my mother, but on Wendy. And that's because, as I said, I'm not a great human being, and I would go after revenge. And I think he's no better human being than I am, so he'll go after revenge too. And I guess I'll end, Webster. You just are so eloquent when you talk about this case. I wish I had 1/10 or 1/100th of your eloquence and your sincerity when you talk about Dan and you talk about the players in this case and what you hope will happen and the boys and everything else. So I'm really glad you're out there in his side and talking about it. And I'm glad I had the chance to meet you, even if only over the airwaves or the internet or whatever they call the thing.
Thank you.
The information superhighway.
Whatever it is.
Remember that? I agree with Joe Potuto, Webster and Baptiste. They have a way with words that most people do not, especially in describing this. AA Legal Focus says, I doubt they're going to flip on Wendy because, again, that entails telling the truth about their own involvement. So maybe the flipping is premature. Alaska, welcome to Alaska, great state. Wendy will flip when she is arrested, which is kind of, I don't want to say humorous, but I could definitely see that potentially happening if we get there. Of course, the name no one mentioned tonight, which Carm has said from day one, is Harvey. She believes he is complicit 100%. He's kind of fallen into the cracks because of his age. I think his appearance, he's looking a little worn by life, but who knows what happens with Harvey Adelson. Again, tomorrow, we are going to have Lori Vallow's police interview ahead of her trial. This trial, believe it or not, is about 2 months and a few days away. We're going to be there in Tallahassee, gavel to gavel. You're going to see these guests and Stephen Webster and Louis Baptiste once we are there. There's a hearing in this case on Thursday, which I'm going to beg Joe and Melissa to cover for me regarding the book. And then Friday, I'm back with Phil Waters, FIL, and Phil Ramos, PHIL. And we are going to continue part 3 of Wendy's police interview and what's really being said between the lines. We will see you tomorrow with a premiere, Thursday live, Friday live. Love you, America. Love you, the UK. Love you, Joe Potuto in Jersey and Italy, wherever she is. And Stephen Webster in Tallahassee. And it's always justice for Dan Markel.